Hello and greetings from Kepner-Tregoe. My name is David Kossoff, and on behalf of Kepner-Tregoe, I want to thank you for attending our webinar, ITIL4, What's New and Why IT Professionals Should Care. So before we dive into the presentation, I just have a few housekeeping items for you. So we'd love to engage with you and are happy to take some questions. And to do this, simply submit your questions using the Ask a Question button. You'll find this located on the top left-hand side of your BrightTalk player. So we ask that you submit questions as you have them, and we will address these throughout the presentation. Next, we want to know if you found this webinar valuable. So at the end, please do take a moment just to rate this by clicking on the Rate This button on the right-hand side of that player. And finally, a recorded version of this presentation, including the slides, will be sent to you through email at the events or after the event's conclusion. So you'll look for this in your inbox in the next few days. And please do feel free to share this with your colleagues. So on to the event now. We're very excited to have Mr. Andrew Vermes leading the session today. He was a recent itSMF award recipient for their 2019 Professional Service Management Award. This was in recognition for his popular master classes on major incident management and problem management. So you are all in for a treat. Again, thank you for spending time with us, and I'll now turn this over to the very capable hands of Mr. Vermes. Andrew?
That's a big build-up. Thank you, David. Let me declare an interest in this to start with. I haven't always been a big fan of ITIL. You may not be a big fan of ITIL. And I'm going to say up front that I have written parts of the incident and problem management practices along with about 3,000 other writers who've been assembled by Axelos to write all kinds of pieces that you'll see in a little while. So there's my interest declared up front. And now let's move into the answer to your question. And we've received a question already: how does ITIL problem management evolved in version 4? And I'm going to answer that later on, not straight away. But let me just say something to this slide. And the answer to the question, what's new in ITIL4, is everything and nothing. So it's the same, but it's completely different. So as we'll see as we go through all of these slides and respond to your questions, we'll see that all of the things you know and the terminology is pretty much the same. So if you need to ask the question, do I need to upgrade? Well, sort of you don't in terms of your knowledge, but in terms of what you do every day, you absolutely do need to change possibly everything, or again, possibly nothing, depending on what is the state of maturity of your current practice. So that's hedging my bets to start with and moving forward from there. A quick word about KT. Kepner-Tregoe, many of you know who we are and what we do, but in case you don't, we're a small global consulting firm which engages in manufacturing, and for the purposes of this particular session, IT and customer support, project management, leadership development, and a practice for helping specifically automotive players. But I've been working for more than 25 years in the part that helps people to improve and mature their IT service management practices. And we deal with things like Lean Six Sigma, and all of that is going to be relevant to this conversation. If you want to find us, we're in these places on the map. Advertisement over. Let's move on. So here's the overview of the session. I just wanted to share with you what we will and won't be doing. If you want to take ITIL Foundation Training version 4, please go ahead and take it. If you already know version 3 very well, you possibly don't need to do that, but I do recommend the version 4 book because it is useful for many reasons, which we'll get into later in the presentation. So this is not going to be a detailed element by element comparison, and you can get those free on Google. You probably already have seen many of them free on Google. This is not transition training, and we are not ITIL trainers. What it is an explanation of the new attributes, and from my point of view, why ITIL4 is the version we should have started with 30-odd years ago, when it was still part of the Office of Government Commerce in the United Kingdom government. And that I always thought was quite funny, You know, the best practices library, the IT infrastructure library, actually being developed by the UK government, which has always been well known and is still well known for running absolutely dreadful IT projects, including some of you may be aware of wasting 17 billion on a massive database for the National Health Service, which, by the way, never got built and never worked. So what this is also about is helping you make decisions about your process frameworks, because I think it's important that we all work with some kind of framework. It's too difficult to make sense of a complex world, whether it's a SIAM world, whether it's an outsourced world, a cloud world, a hybrid world, whatever the world is, we need frameworks in order to make sense of our IT service offerings. So let's get into the ITIL4 piece and start getting some details and really get into the things that matter. We've got 5 points in the agenda. We'll look at the guiding principles. Some of you may be familiar with these. For you, these are a reminder. We'll have a look at the practices in ITIL4. If you've already obtained the ITIL4 book, this will be a reminder. We'll look at a peek behind the scenes at some of those practices. We'll talk about the upgrade path and what to do next, and in brackets, if anything, meaning that you may be in a state of maturity where you can look at this presentation, you can look at some of the base ITIL4 materials and think, good job, Fred, assuming there's somebody called Fred here. I'm sure there must be one. Good job, Fred. We perhaps are in good shape and we just need to keep these things in mind. And that would be a lovely state to be in. So what to expect from ITIL4? One of the issues that lots of people always had with ITIL3, and one of the reasons why it was not as popular outside the United Kingdom as it might have been popular in the UK and in Singapore and some other former British territories, perhaps not so popular in the United States, not hugely popular in other parts of Africa, is that ITIL 1, 2, 3 appeared, and I say appeared advisedly, to focus on processes. And ticking boxes is how that was interpreted by many of the people involved. And they started to think, well, okay, we've ticked all those boxes, and so now we're good. And actually, that's not, of course, true, because we need to be flexible and delivering value to the business that we're part of all the time. So less prescription this time. Absolutely no magic formulae. On the downside, there's more work to do for you. There's a lot more thinking and continuous improvement work here that perhaps you have already signed up for, but whatever you signed up for, I can promise you it's going to be tougher, but much, much more rewarding. And why? Because this is, for the first time, a holistic approach to life delivering IT services. And that's really the key to all of this. Before we go too far ahead, let me put in the disclaimer. Other frameworks are available. Safe, Secure Agile Framework, IT4IT, so the open group, DevOps, many of you will be following or attempting, a very good thing. And Verisum, or value-driven, evolving, responsive, integrated service management, if you want to. Service integration and management, for those of you who have a distributed ecosystem of vendors and outsourced providers. All of those are useful and worth looking at. Whether you're going to adopt any part of them is very much up to you. All effective work requires some framework. Those of you familiar with Kepner-Tregoe will remember that we divide our work life into 4 or 5 colors. When we're going to find cause, we're in red. When we want to make a decision involving a bunch of stakeholders, we're in green mode. And if you're not sure what all that means, please ping me and I will answer that question now, but I'll also answer the question by sending you some reading material afterwards. Frameworks are good because we need to put things into buckets in order to make effective use of our resources. ITIL has always provided a great deal of useful material and unfortunately some unuseful material too. So you've tried some stuff, you found it hasn't worked for you. One example of that has been the artificial feeling split between incident and problem management. And I understand the reasons for that, but ITIL 2.3 never said you had to have separate teams doing those things. They did say there were separate activities and separate processes involved that needed to be handled slightly differently. So not everything will be appropriate for your organization in ITIL4, just as it wasn't in ITIL3. Big message here is adapt everything you see for your own purposes. The days of taking something off the shelf and implementing it in your organization, I think, possibly never existed, but they're certainly over now. Now the guiding principles. There is a longer list than this when you look at the guiding principles book, and when we get to the end and when you get the copy of this presentation, you'll see a link to where you can find that. It's cheap, buy it, it's lovely. That's a positive recommendation. You can look for it on Amazon or in the Axelos website or in the stationery office, TSO, if you want to find it. But front and center, right at the top, focus on value. And this is an absolutely fantastic thing, because value is what we're trying to build for the users that we serve, whether they are internal users who are serving customers or making motor vehicles or making software or whatever it is they're doing to bring value to our organization and the end consumer, or whether you're serving directly an end consumer by providing them with software or services. It's all about what value can we deliver to those individuals doing those important tasks. And this is an interesting thing, because not everybody you deal with in your organization, and possibly some of your team, won't understand what value means for their own organization. I was talking with a nice lady called Karen, who works very effectively at a UK bank. And she said, a lot of the people in our IT services organization have no clue what adds the most value in our organization. I said, well, how do you know that? Well, she said, I asked a whole bunch of them what the most valuable and useful apps and processes were that people were using. And everybody, sample of hundreds, everybody said, it's the customer-facing stuff. It's the stuff where people open accounts. It's the stuff where people buy new products. It's the stuff where we help them get done their financial transactions or their 401ks or whatever it is they're doing. And she said, every single one of them's wrong. And they have no idea. Despite the fact that 20,000 people use these customer-facing applications, and of course they are responsible for the flow of money, the actually most important application in our organization is the Treasury application, which has 8 or 10 people using it, that's all. And Treasury is the function that makes sure the bank buys money at the right price so that it has indeed money to lend to people who want to borrow it. And nobody thought about that. They didn't really understand how money flows through a bank and how financial transactions are really processed. So in those circumstances, it was very difficult for the app developers, the service managers, the incident managers, the problem managers, change release managers, very difficult for all of those people to conceive of where exactly they were adding the most value in their daily work. And I think this focus on value is taking up lots of time in this presentation, because it's the first time that ITIL has been so strong about value, front and center at the top of the list. So every time we move, every time we release something, every time we take a user story and try and turn it into a piece of code, we should be focusing on what value is this delivering to the whole organization and its customers, and how is it delivering that value. And I think that message has not come through previous versions of ITIL, although, in fairness, when you look at some of the other frameworks, it has been much more present in Vermes and in IT4IT. And if you like those frameworks, then please carry on. Second thing, start where you are. I think big project to improve the quality of services, it's difficult. It's difficult to re-architect from the ground up. And those of you who enjoy and work in an agile way now will have already spotted that quite often organizational change initiatives are huge pieces of waterfall stuff that never deliver what they're expected to deliver. Whereas iterations of improvements every day is where it's at. So progress iteratively. And there's something to share about that, which is progress iteratively with feedback. So if we're going to improve or make some small changes to the user experience, let's get some feedback. Now, you may have automated ways of doing that. Certainly the large software vendors like Microsoft can see whether anybody's clicking in their new little feature in Excel or PowerPoint or not. And if they are clicking in it, are they doing it in a clunky way? And they can get some data out of that in an automated way. And you may have AI bots that help you to do that as well. But it's also important to get the personal feedback of the users and the customer community about whether this thing is working for them, and if it is, why, and if it isn't, why not. And then collaborate. And you know that KT promotes visibility. You know, if we show our working when we are putting forward a root cause analysis, or we're putting forward a project plan, or we're putting forward a sprint plan, it's very much easier for our colleagues to make a contribution and say, hey, Jim, there's something you left out of the list of possible causes here. If you've got visible thinking going, and you know Katie's all about visible thinking, we're going to go on being about visible thinking. So whatever we're doing is going to be in line with ITIL4, because we've always said this. Right, next one, think and work holistically. Now, I confess, I have been involved in a lot of KT projects where we have improved the speed of problem solving enormously. You know, people have got to causes 75, 80% faster, even faster than that. And that's lovely, but not if the root cause sits in the development queue for another 3 months. That does nobody any good. All we've done is move the bottleneck someplace else. So sometimes it's worth just making little iterations in every process step so you raise the whole performance. And you know that's true, but still we work, many of us, in silos, and we find it difficult to get that to happen unless you can get together a whole process town hall and just get people in there with some post-it notes and some ideas and work it out in a very agile and practical way. And that leads us to simple and practical. And one of the big discussions I'm hearing, certainly at the ITSM meetings that I go to in the UK, I've just been to a conference in Krakow in Poland, it's all about people. As AI takes over the simple tasks, what gets left are the hard things. So we do need to help people to take practical steps to do whatever it is they're doing better on a daily basis. And that begs the question, well, how do we do that? And one of those principles is stop and solicit feedback. You know, how do we do in the last 5 minutes, the last hour? If we're having a problem review meeting or a post-incident review, and we stop at half an hour, actually, what have we learned in this half hour? And what can we learn about the way we run this meeting? You know, I know that seems it's going round and round in circles, but learning is continuous, and we want to promote that atmosphere of learning and sharing. And last in this, optimize and automate. I mean, you know what? I still see people doing password resets manually. I still see people manually closing Citrix sessions because the user can't close them and they're kind of stuck in something, and that's being done manually. And there's a whole bunch of things that are clunky and manual, and are they really great uses of people's time? It seems to me that some of the work that our colleagues are doing is a little bit like chipping bits of coal with a pickaxe out of the bottom of the mine. I mean, it's not life-enhancing work, and wherever we can automate, we should, and you know that because you are automating, I know. So Why have I spent so much time on guiding principles? Because this is exactly what the whole of ITIL4 is about. It's making things work for you in a practical way so that you get results. And that requires a degree of principled interaction. And why have I got the great Ella Fitzgerald up here? Well, you might remember that's the great hit way back in the 50s. Some of you may or may not have been alive then, but anyway, it's a great song. Other people have sung it since. It ain't what you do, it's the way that you do it. And that kind of sums up these guiding principles. Let's make quality the watchword for everything that we do, whether it's change or release or integration or anything else. I promise you I'm getting to this question of how does ITIL4 evolve. Now let's get to a vote while we're talking about value. And let's look at the question, how much of your current IT services processes are wholly focused on organizational value? Let's just take a vote on this point. So we'll keep the poll open for about a minute and get you to think about this. Think about your IT services processes and how much of them are focused on delivering organizational value. And I'd be surprised and delighted if anybody has over 80%. And I'd be disappointed if it was less than 20%. Will this be a normal distribution? Who knows? Please all vote now. We've still got some voting time. Oh, it's down at the bottom end so far. Oh, it's going up. Yep, okay. Any more votes to come in? Oh, yeah, there's some people in the higher end. That's good. Lovely. Very glad to see it. And 10 seconds before I stop the voting. Fantastic. 12 of you voted. Thank you for doing so. So I'm not going to say that's a statistically valid sample. 16 people have voted. So let's move on. From guiding principles to the service value chain. So what's different about ITIL is that it's much more focused on the means of delivering value. So there are pieces in there for every service and every practice around how to plan those services, how to engage with stakeholders. So those of you who are alumni of KT project management, you know all about planning. And if you're alumni of some other project management method like Prince2, you also know all about planning. That's great. Methods for engaging with stakeholders, how to make design and transition work effectively, the whole process of obtaining and building, delivering and supporting, and last but definitely first, really, improving. So those are the things that we're very much concerned with in ITIL4. So it's about the journey and the goal. So previously it was very much about the goal and have we ticked the box for having all of these processes in place? Yes, we have. That was fine. Now it's about the quality of the journey. It ain't what you do. That's the message of ITIL4. And to reinforce that message, we have a new name. So all of the things that you know about release management, change management, problem management, and this is getting back to the question that I was posed right at the beginning, now are called practices. Because we're taking a holistic view, we're not worrying too much about the content of the process boxes. They're more or less the same as they were before. We're worrying much more about the quality of delivery in the process boxes. So in each practice, you'll see a section that talks about organizations and people and how you make those excellent. Each section or each practice guide contains information about how to move information and how to use technology. Each practice guide contains sections on partners and suppliers, and most important, how to map your own value stream and make sure your processes deliver value. So that's really the big difference. So it's everything and nothing. It's more a philosophical change, if you will, rather than a deep practical change. So having pressed that button now for 26 minutes, and I'm sorry for boring you with all that, let's move on to looking at what happens in some of the individual practices. We're not going to do all of them. So we've got three types of practices, not processes, practices. There are service management practices, ones that you know of, and we'll list those in a moment. There are technical management practices, and again, you'll have these in place, and you'll see the list in a moment. And there are general management practices. And really what ITIL is now doing is making sure that it has some of those important practices from a general management point of view about human capital and all of those useful things to be part of the ITIL4 landscape. So it's basically stealing lots of stuff from other places. That's fine. We want, or Axelos at least want, ITIL to be quite inclusive and include as much stuff that's going to help you deliver value as it possibly can. So let's have a look at the individual ones. And I have a question for you around this in a moment. So first of all, general management. You will have much of this already. You do these things. Relationship management, much more of a role than it had previously. You all know how to do these things perfectly well. But there are some useful tips in the practice guides that you'll see when you look for them in the Axelos website. And the purpose of showing you this list is really to reassure you that huge amounts are not changing, but ITIL4 is adding to your library. Then the ones we're kind of most interested in, are these the same as before? Yeah, they pretty much are. Question for you though. What I'd like to ask you, and please use your question from the audience button for this. Which of these, if you had to pick just one or two, which of these are the areas where you feel you can add the most value to your organization? Which of these add the most value to your organization? And I promise you, I am going to answer the question about problem management. It's coming up in about 7 slides. So please use your questions button now and look at that list. Well, in which of these can we add in our organization the most value? Or do we add most value? And I'm not asking for data. This is not a problem analysis, guys. You don't have to back it up with hard data, just your idea. Okay, so some very different answers coming through here. Problem management and change management, service configuration management, change control. Actually, we're changing the name of that. Once you see the practice guide, it's going to turn out to be called change enablement. And that's a funny thing, isn't it? Let me just talk for a moment about change enablement. One of the traditional views of change is that developers and IT folks in general can't be trusted to do anything risky. So we have to have a change control board or a CAB to control their behavior. And the philosophy of ITIL4 has moved to the point where we're now thinking of what is the means by which we enable these people to deliver effective change on time, every time, without having to look over their shoulder and check their work all the time. Now, wouldn't that be a lovely thing? So I encourage you to start thinking change enablement. Not listed, but knowledge management. Yep, great. Let's go back for a moment. Capacity and performance management, service continuity management. Interesting stuff. Very lovely. Release management. So we've got kind of a whole different landscape out there, obviously reflecting your own organization and the way it works now, and that's fine. So we see service management practices as distinct from general management practices and technical practices. So specifically, there are some technical skills around deployment, platform management, and software development that require different technical skills and have been marked out and separated into a different group. Now let's look behind the scenes into some of the details. So one of the things about service desks is everybody is trying to make sure that they are working really efficiently and delivering fast fixes to users and customers as quickly as possible. So service desk, this is the definition, unchanged really. But now we're looking much more at, and I'm sure you are too, looking at user satisfaction, looking at how to handle multiple communication channels, not very much addressed in previous versions, but now is. And so how to handle the interfaces between web forms, event monitoring, outreach, telephones, emails, and every other way, Twitter, social media, every other way that we find out that there's some issue that users or customers want us to deal with. And that could be internal social media, it could be Slack channels, it could be Jira, it could be anything that gives us those multiple communication channels, because we want to know what's going on. That's ultimately the purpose of raising tickets in service desk, because we want to know what's going on. And we want to make it easy, because a lot of time people have not been satisfied with service desks in the past, and they haven't raised tickets. At Kepner-Tregoe, we do regular audits of end-to-end process effectiveness. And one of the things I find again and again is that very few organizations have a ticket raising level of above 50%. What I mean by that is that of all the funny things that happen on users' desktops, laptops, mobile devices that disturb their workflow, less than half of them actually get a ticket. Because what do people do? They reboot. Why do they reboot? Because it worked before. And of course, if we are event monitoring, we may well be picking that up, that we get multiple reboots around a particular service, around a particular application, and we may do something about that if we're monitoring at service level. But it's sad if users are not reporting, because it tells us that something's wrong. And one of the changes in ITIL4 is that metrics are moving towards quality and away from crude numerics. So much more use of AI bots to have reasonable conversations with users after or even during the progress of the ticket. So we learn something about the quality of the way we are doing this, and is that doing it for the users and the customers. So I'm seeing a lot of organizations now, and I'm hoping yours is one of these, cutting out the how many calls have I answered and moving on to how satisfied were the users with the way this was handled, kind of stuff. And here's an example of that from somebody that you will either love or hate in just a moment. But first, so old service desk was these 5 things. New support desk. You don't have to call it support desk. You can call it what you like. It can be a service desk. The nomenclature is not important here. Provide real help. Maximize user satisfaction. Focus on the value and help the user get what they need. Too often people complain to me that we get taken down a technical path as soon as we call the help desk or we submit a ticket by web form or email. We get asked a bunch of technical questions and nobody asks, what is it we're trying to do and what help do we need with that? And I think that's really important. Of course, it doesn't apply to everybody, but it's important. And one thing that's important is making service desks a little bit more like general practitioners, doctors, making them experts in general practice so that they feel a value of what they're doing and they have a long-term role in our organizations, not just a short tenure and a path to some glorious future as a developer or in some other role. And here's an example from one of our customers where you're seeing actually a graphic that's from Microsoft, and they are on a journey right now to get away from the scripted and unhelpful responses that you might have experienced in the past to help me as a user, advise me as a user, empower me as a user to get the value that I need today. And we're proud to support them in that journey in training a bunch of thousands of people, in fact, in KT methods, in situation appraisal, problem analysis, and so on. So that's really nice to see a major organization following that path away from crude numerical metrics, which have encouraged unhelpful behaviors. It reminds me of one of the guys in Poland with a lovely story of Marcin, who great fellow, who was pointed out as one of the genius engineers in this organization. And the question was, Marcin, how do you do it? And the response was, well, it's easy. I just come in early and I take up all the easy tickets. Okay, so, you know what I'm talking about, ladies and gentlemen. It's very easy to game numerical metrics, and smart people will do that, but it doesn't add any value either to you or the users or customers. So, old versus new service desk. This is all about value. Let's have a look at the incident management piece. This is the same as before. It is wholly focused on restoring service by the most effective and efficient means, but now integrated into the whole service value chain. So we're seeing incident managers more and more being conscious of the whole architecture, and as they take the restoration actions, making sure that they don't disturb anything else. Because the last thing we want is to destroy another user's satisfaction in repairing or restoring the service that's broken. So key elements that are being focused on, the Incident Management Practice Guide as of today is not out, but should shortly appear on the Axelos or My Axelos site, which I'll refer you to at the end. So key elements here, more and more automated incident detection. So a lot of folks have event monitoring, which is focused at an architecture or an infrastructure level, so we know when key components are out or not. But more and more of this is going to be happening at service level, because there are more and more lovely tools which help us watch the traffic on all kinds of applications, and if it is abnormal in some way, we can start to have a look at why. So automated incident detection is coming more and more at service level. Key elements you'll expect from Kepner-Tregoe, since I had a hand in writing this stuff: accurate description. Those folks that do not work with Kepner-Tregoe, whenever they turn up in one of our workshops, will complain that both the title of the ticket and the description thereafter has some gaping holes in it. And of course, we do want to make sure that that is filled. And then let's have a look at periodic incident review. So progress. Progress is an important thing to track, and one thing that's happening is more and more advice in ITIL4 about how do you track the progress of an incident. Those of you familiar with Katie know that we have a life cycle that we expect, where we understand the user's issue, we understand what they want from us, they understand any kind of restrictions or parameters they want to set out about that, and then we take them through the options for restoration, and we get towards the point where we're able to implement the restore action or workaround quickly. And watching that happen is dependent on tooling, and there's plenty of advice about that in ITIL. So the focus, as you'll have gathered, is very much on quality, and those of you familiar with Katie will know that quality and incident management depends on data, and one of the quality measures that you can pick up from your own ticketing system is looking at the description of the cases. And because we know that good case titles can cut 25% off the resolving time, and good case titles will always contain the object, that's the process or configuration item or asset or system or subsystem with the fault and exactly what the observed symptoms are. And if you have that, it tends to start the problem solving off really well. Now, finally, problem management. What's different? Well, nothing. It remains focused on decreasing the risk that incidents occur. But problem management in ITIL4 is not just about the technology. It's also about the way in which we've gone through the process of solving those problems and learning from any hiccups we've had along the way. So there's a lot more advice about what we've learned as we have investigated, and what we've learned about the way in which the interaction between the different parties, vendors, third parties, outsourced providers have worked. Key elements are obviously capture of information and a proactive approach. Again and again, we're focused with clients on a reactive form of problem management. And that's kind of difficult for us to deal with, because what we want to do here is think about being proactive. We want to think about things that might go wrong with the infrastructure, things that might go wrong with the services, and proactively deal with them. Every day you see stuff that you don't like the look of. Now, for how many of those things that don't smell or look right or sound right have you got a problem ticket? And so strong advice coming from ITIL4 is you need to see those things, you need to record those things and deal with them before they cause any kind of trouble. The other thing to say about problem management is it does not require a separate team, but it does require some strong direction from top management that we are interested in proactivity, and we see that proactivity in more problem tickets and more problem tasks if you happen to use that. Now, I want to ask you another question here at this point. How satisfied are you with the quality of information you find in incident problem tickets? So another poll is just opened up for you here. Okay, we've got 2 votes so far. Both depends on the engineer working on it. This is good. You must all be KT customers because nobody's voted for answer 4. Oh dear. There we go. Let's run that vote for a little bit longer. So let's go back to the questions from the audience, and specifically, how has it evolved in ITIL4? So in ITIL4, you get much more specific advice about the types of information that you need to be gathering in order to have a successful outcome in problem management. And it'll be no surprise to you folks to know that we're interested in what is the problem, but also to look for comparable items, systems, subsystems, servers, channels that do not have the problem. And then your path towards cause is to look for differences between the affected and the unaffected item, and then what change or trigger event could combine with that weakness or material difference in order to cause the problem or symptom. So ITIL4 is giving you much more direction and advice about the quality of the data that you need to be capturing from the outset, even from the very beginning of the incident, in order to get a successful outcome. And I hope that that has answered your question. If not, please do ask again. So let's move forward. There is a transition training available from many providers. We are not one of those, so I'm not going to advertise any particular one. Transition training includes 4 modules for different roles. So create, deliver, and support is what it sounds like. Direct, plan, and improve also is what it sounds like. High velocity IT, however, is something slightly different. And responding to this modern world in which Amazon and others can spin up servers in a nanosecond and deploy hundreds of thousands of small iterations of changes every day. That's what high velocity IT is about, and how to manage those very fast processes. And then, of course, and not least or last, it drives stakeholder value. Often stakeholders don't really know what they want. And so we have to work hard as experts to help them realize what they want as part of our BA process or business analysis process, so that we actually can deliver them the results that they really need. So that's one upgrade path. So as we get to the end of this time, and there'll be some time at the end for more questions, here's an approach. The point of all frameworks, including the others I mentioned at the beginning, is to help you assess your maturity and to prioritize improvements. So a simple approach is identify your most important services. You've just done that. Problem and change management is a place to start for some of you. For some of you, it's change control. For others, it's release management, as you said earlier. List areas for improvement in those areas of practices. Look at the relevant ITIL practices, whether it's change enablement or service desk or event management, and to make some choices. And at this point, I would say, look, you can keep things as they are. They may be fit for purpose. You can borrow some ITIL ideas, or you can mix the two, keep some things the same, borrow. This is the way we continuously improve. We steal all the good stuff and we incorporate it into our methods and working practices. It should not be, and in ITIL4 I can't emphasize it enough, we should not be trying to tick the ITIL box anymore at all. This is all about taking good stuff off the IT infrastructure library shelf and using it to the best effect in your organization. Now, Those of you familiar with decision analysis will know what I'm talking about, making some choices. Those of you not familiar with decision analysis, we can by all means send you the book chapter and the process card. And those of you who are familiar with it but have lost your process card, we'll be sending you a link so you can pick an electronic version up to remind you of the decision-making and stakeholder improvement process anyway, so you won't need to worry about that. And this presentation and the recording will, of course, be available to you afterwards as well. So we're coming to the end of our allotted time. There's still some time for questions if you want to ask them. ITIL4 is, at least in my view, and I've declared my interest, much more sensible than before. It's much more practical. There's much more stuff in there integrating with other frameworks. So anything you liked from DevOps or IT4IT is very likely referred to in ITIL4 and will give you some guidance about how to integrate different practices and processes. It includes, inevitably, many ideas you'll already be using. So you can look at it and go, oh, gold star for me, fantastic. But most importantly, it's focused on continual improvement, and it's more about value creation this time than about collecting qualifications. Being too much emphasis, in my view, in the past about getting shiny badges because I've passed all these ITIL exams. But what we want are folks who actually deliver value on a daily basis, whether it's incident management, change enablement, service continuity management, or whatever it is. Thank you very much for listening. I'm available, as is David, for more questions if you'd like to ask them. And we're watching the question box as you... right. If we use the same team to deal with incident and problem management, how should they spend their time? 50% incident and 50% problem management. That's a fantastic question, and thank you very much for asking. And the answer, I'm afraid, is going to be vague. Here it is. Have a look at your incident flows and start identifying which class of incident, in what kind of technology, in which applications, could you perhaps reprioritize as a P4. So anything where you have applications which are not customer facing, not distinctly value enabling, perhaps one or two little corporate applications that not too many people use to deliver value, deprioritize those and ask your people instead to start creating a few problem tickets where there has been no associated incident. And that could be anything. A process they feel is not functioning well. It could be an asset where they've seen some degree of latency, but it actually hasn't caused some trouble yet. From event monitoring, we've seen some wobbling. It hasn't gone outside the thresholds yet, but we're worried it might. Get them to proactively create some problem tickets and use the time they've gained back from not doing so many incidents. Now, let's talk about incident and problem management. Every investment of a minute in problem management, we have found, will cut between 2 and 6 incidents out. So it's worth investing some extra time in problem management. Now, in the spirit of the earlier advice and guiding principle, start where you are. And instead of saying 50%, 50%, start with any problem, proactive problem tickets. So say to your team, I'd like to see each of you create every day one problem ticket for something you don't like the look of. And spend 20 minutes working on it and see where that gets you. And then as you get more experienced in getting to cause quicker, cutting the possibility of those incidents out altogether, then you will find yourself with more and more time to create more and more problem tickets and move slowly. So that's the thought. I start a new ITIL principal role in January after the demand. I think I know who you are, madam. Thank you very much for Suggested reading. There is a really great little revision guide, ITIL4 revision guide, which we will get onto now, and there's some reading here. Now, it's not in this. So you've obviously read the ITIL Foundation, ITIL4, because you've seen that in your training. If you haven't already got the revision guide, then I would certainly do that. The other thing that I would do is, if you're not already on top of it, I think you probably are, start looking at Googling Stuart Runce and ITIL4 and read some of his blog posts. I think that's a useful thing. And good luck to you. Very big shame about Thomas Cook and all of that stuff. Great company. And I think we've met. Anyway, you'll get in touch with me by LinkedIn if you need to. So Stuart Runce, and get the revision guide. I think it's 15 quid from Amazon or from Exlos. So that's that one. And if we have any more questions, then I'm happy to take them at this point. And I'm going to leave this reference list up until we get to the end of our time. Yep. Is there anything else? Nope. There are no new questions at this point. So, look, thank you very much, all of you, for turning up on a Thursday afternoon or Thursday morning, depending on where you are in your time zone, or right in the middle of the night if you're far, far away. I hope it's been useful to you. Aha, there you are. Yes. Do get in touch with me independently via LinkedIn if you want to, and it's lovely to see you here. Please remember to do your feedback button, as David said at the beginning, because otherwise we don't know whether you liked it or didn't like it. Some presenters now tell you about how many children they've got to feed, but actually my children have left, so I'm not too worried, but it'd be good to see your feedback. Thank you very much, everybody.
Hi, folks. This is David again. Thank you very much for attending today. We will follow up with you through email with a recorded copy of the presentation, which is yours to revisit this webcast or webinar, or to share with your colleagues, and please do that if you'd like. So on behalf of Andrew and Kepner-Tregoe, we thank you again for your time, and we wish you a great day. If you still do have some questions for Andrew, you can find him on LinkedIn, and you can get him there. Thanks again. Look forward to seeing you in future webinars.
Thanks, everybody.